Welcome into the Bears Squad Show. I'm Joe George, post-game host. The Super Bowl is set, but now the question is, how close are the Chicago Bears to being a Super Bowl team in the next few years?
I'm Lauren Cox from Locked On Bears, and the thing that's going to get them closer is this rookie draft class as they get older and build off of a really strong first season.
Hey guys, Taylor Doyle here, host of Making Monsters. Eric Bieniemy out the door back to Kansas City, but still holding on to Al Harris and Declan Doyle here in Chicago.
Bear down, Chicago. It's the Bears Squad. Everything Chicago Bears, every week. Covering all the big hits and game-changing plays from the Windy City. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. From Soldier Field to the next great chapter, the Bears Squad Show starts now.
Welcome into the Bears Squad Show here on the Locked On Bears YouTube and audio channels. Joe George, Lauren Cox, and Taylor Doyle here with you for the next hour. On today's show, we'll discuss how far the Bears are from being a Super Bowl team. Are they one player away, more than one player away? We'll get to all of that. We'll talk about how PFF graded the Bears rookie draft class as the number one draft class from this last year and who we have the most confidence in going forward. An update on the latest on the Bears coaching staff of, well, at this point, who's all staying. And we'll talk about some of the changes that are happening on the other teams inside the NFC North as well. But we'll start here. Lauren, I was watching a clip from a local Chicago sports radio station, and I saw one of these guys say the Bears are one player away from being a Super Bowl team next year. And I think there was some insinuation it's Max Crosby, Trey Hendrickson, that caliber of a player. Do you feel like the Bears are one player away, or do you feel like they're a little farther from that right now?
I mean, it's a tricky rhetorical trick, right? Because, sure, if you could have added Max Crosby or Trey Hendrickson to this year's Bears roster, they're probably they're certainly in the NFC Championship game and giving you a hard push for the Super Bowl. But, inherently, the Bears are not going to be able to just bring back last year's team, pick it up, add a player to it, and then run it back again. So, are they a player away? I don't think so, just because we're going to see multiple changes here, at least one new starting safety, potentially a new starting linebacker, changes the defensive line. I mean, depending on what they do with DJ Moore and even DeAndre Swift on offense, it's going to be a different enough team that it's not just, add Max Crosby and then you're in the Super Bowl, but it's add Max Crosby and get a couple safeties and get a couple, do all these other changes. Then, you can start to talk my way into the Super Bowl, but that doesn't feel like exactly the same as one player away.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that when you're talking about it too, they were close. You have the argument on each side where you're like, okay, well, you're a play away from beating the Rams. You play Seattle. Do you feel like you could beat Seattle? We'll never know that. But I do think they'd beat any AFC team because I just don't know how strong they are on that side right now. But you are talking about a team that needs a lot of changes. They kind of got through the regular season by getting these takeaways and not doing much of anything else. Now you got Kyler Gordon back, and you kind of saw that in the postseason, what that added. But now you are, to your point, you're having conversations about a Brisker and a Byard, who were huge pieces of that defense and any success they did have last year. You still don't have a pass rush. We're still talking about a defensive tackle that you need. So I do think that it's more than one player, in my opinion, but I could see why people feel like if you replicated this exact team and added Max Crosby or Trey Hendrickson, how you felt like that was an added advantage. Unfortunately, that's not the circumstances they're in. There's a lot of decisions they have to make, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and then probably left tackle too. Because of Ozzie getting hurt, you do have a conversation there now that you have to kind of figure out, do you roll with Braxton? Do you put Theo in there? Do you do what you did in the postseason and let Tooney stay at left tackle and try and keep McFadden here? So there's conversations on that too. And that's unfortunate because you did feel like you had your guy in Ozzie. So I think we have too many topics that we'll have to talk about for it to be like, go get one guy and you're in the championship game next year.
Yeah, it's interesting because the idea of adding Max Crosby to this team is incredible. And I will say I'm a little lower on the idea of Trey Hendrickson now. I really like the idea last year. It's he was unhappy in Cincinnati. You're probably going to trade low-level capital for him, have him for a year, then extend him. Now he's in the open market. You're in a bidding war. You don't have the most optimal cap space going into the offseason. So I feel like it's just a lot more complicated. I think when you talk about adding a player of that caliber in free agency, all those things that you guys want to do just become even more complicated of getting multiple pieces on your defense. And ultimately, yeah, go ahead.
Not to mention that, whether you're giving up assets to get Max Crosby or clearing salary cap space to sign Trey Hendrickson, you have to subtract players in that process. Like you can't, even if everyone was back under contract for next season at the same price they were last offseason, like you can't fit that in. So like there's going to be, it may be a net positive, but like whether you're subtracting Tremaine Edmonds to sign Trey Hendrickson or whether you're trading someone like DJ Moore to get Max Crosby, like you are inherently going to lose in some areas in order to add in this area that may well be worth it, but it doesn't give you the net boost of what you think about just adding one player to this team. It's like, well, no, you're kind of rearranging the whole makeup here.
Yeah, ultimately, doesn't it just feel like it also just comes down to Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson too? Like you need the defense to be better than it was this year, obviously. Like you can't rely on the turnover the way you did. But we talked about this a little bit last week about how, yeah, maybe the Bears can't repeat the exact same success that they had this year with the turnovers. But Lauren, I think it was you who said they also might just not be in as many one-score games as they were last year because the offense can just be significantly better. So ultimately, like you might be a player or two away, but if Caleb does take that next step, I still feel like the Bears are still in that conversation no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just Caleb, but it's all the young guys, right? Like you're looking for, we'll talk about the rookie class in a minute here, but any of those guys to continue to improve and not just do the great things they did as a rookie, but take a step up forward. And, I think other young players that maybe didn't take that massive leap that you were looking for, like a Rome Odunze, or even I think there's still plenty of room for Jaron Dexter to be that much better. And even some of these other young guys that are still early enough in their careers that they are not at their ceilings at all yet. Like that's where you look for that internal improvement to be such a big factor. And the external stuff is probably going to be a little bit more minor by comparison.
Yeah, and when you're talking about the offense too, we've had the conversation of the issues of drops all year. I mean, we saw the final number was over 400 yards of lost, when it comes to yards lost with drops. I saw a stat today about the adjusted completion percentage, and Caleb gets up to like 65%, which is the largest increase of any quarterback in the NFL when it comes to that adjusted number. And so things like that you start to add in, if you catch half of those, what does some of these games look like? Does it come down to those final touchdown scores? Is your offense able to consistently put up and score faster? That's one of the things that we wanted to see all year. And hopefully some of those things start coming in. But then you also are going to the other side and you're saying, okay, but what if they're not getting 2.5 takeaways every single game too? How much does that adjust the field where you're getting the ball and all of those type of things? So it's so unpredictable. And that's why from year to year, it's a little scary to just kind of say, okay, well, look, we did this year. Look what Washington just went through. Look what Houston went through a couple years ago. The Jags have done it. There's a lot of teams that feel like they're on that trajectory up, and then the next year things just kind of fall back down once there's film on the quarterback and things like that. But it does feel like for the first time the Bears are on the path to. It doesn't feel like this was just like a blimp. It looks like we could build off of it, but there's a lot of decisions to be made. And I feel like what we can trust is that the relationship between Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles got us a really good rookie class. And maybe some of those things continue moving forward and you're able to add through the draft rather than having to count on free agents and spend that big money.
Yeah, I think that's a sneaky good point there, right? That like the draft is what they absolutely nailed and free agency has kind of been more of the struggle for Ryan Poles. And so now when you don't have a lot of salary cap space to make big free agent moves, maybe that you can kind of keep him out of his own way a little bit and not overspend on guys. And if Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen can help him keep hitting on draft classes like this, like that's not only the better, more sustainable way to build a roster anyway, but you also just avoid some of the pitfalls that we've seen Ryan Poles fall into.
What's your guys' gut tell you about what when we get to preseason predictions next year? Do you feel like the Bears are going to be a sneaky Super Bowl pick for people, or maybe kind of a split of they're going to miss the playoffs and fall off, and some people are going to pick them to go all the way? Like Taylor, what does your gut tell you about what people will view the Bears as going into next season, assuming they're healthy?
I think there's going to be a decent split because I've already seen it early on, and this is way too early predictions that people are doing, but we see them every single year. And I've seen the articles that are like, Bears may be in trouble, no cap space and like all of these reasons. The defense, there's a lot of players that they have to figure out a way to keep. And what do they do with this, and this? They may lose coaches, which we'll talk about that of not possibly happening aside from Eric Bieniemy. But I do think that we're going to see the split where there's going to be people that are like, the Bears are going to win 12 games, win the North, and we'll go to the conference championship. And then we're going to have the group of people that's going to be like, I don't know. I think things come back down to earth a little bit, and Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams aren't able to get lucky with all of these fourth quarter comebacks, and things are going to catch up to them a little. And there's going to be people that think we're back to, third, fourth in the division. So I do think it's going to be really split, just depending on how much people believe in Ben and Caleb. I think that's going to be the main thing this offseason.
Yeah, I think we're going to be really sick of hearing the word regression by April. That's going to be the buzzword of the offseason, of everyone saying, well, you point to all the one-score wins and how, probably not likely that the Packers, Lions, and Vikings all stay under double-digit wins next season. Like, they all had various things that contributed to them not being as productive as maybe we thought, and at least one of them will be better next season and probably win double-digit games. So, the path will be just as hard, if not harder, for the Bears, and everyone's going to say, the one-score games and stuff they're going to lose. And then, there's still a lot to figure out in terms of who your safeties are going to be and how you're going to improve this defense and how much better does Caleb Williams actually get in the offseason. Like, there's enough question marks around this team that I suspect they'll be a popular candidate to do worse than last year, but there'll be enough faith in Caleb Williams that there'll be a vocal minority that is all in on this team, continuing to build off what they did this past year.
Speaking of way too early things, Taylor, I saw a redraft on the cusp of the Patriots going to the Super Bowl. I am a little surprised, to be honest with you, that people are like, yeah, Drake May made the Super Bowl, like the Bears automatically made the wrong pick, or what in a redraft would take Drake May. Do you feel like that's fair at all, Taylor, or it's like Caleb was always the right pick, and of course he's still the right pick?
Yeah, I think right now I'm rolling with Caleb. I think that Caleb was the right pick for Chicago, and I think that's the difference, is people don't know how to separate that of this quarterback was drafted by the right regime. I think Drake May went to the right place for him, and I don't know if we're watching the Bears with winning the North if Drake May was quarterback this year. I just don't know if we're watching that because of some of the things that we needed Caleb to do with his legs and the Houdini stuff and Iceman stuff. And like Drake May, I mean, we can go through all of the logistics of it where he had some really good moments. We've seen him, we've seen the arm he has. We've seen him be able to use his legs when he needs to. And this playoff game, we saw him kind of save the game at a certain point with his legs. And so you've seen flashes of that. But the whole argument this whole season was the strength of schedule, which it has been with the Bears too. But the Bears had that kind of gauntlet towards the end when it was Philly and Pittsburgh and Green Bay twice and the Lions and the Niners. And they not saying they did it perfectly, but they were able to get out of that with, saying, okay, well, maybe they are able to beat some of these good teams. And then I'm seeing people's argument now where it was like, well, Drake May just had the most difficult path to the Super Bowl that anyone's ever had, having to beat three of the best defenses, And I'm like, he played very badly. Like he wasn't the reason they won any of those games. So yeah, like he made a lot of mistakes. That's the crazy part. I think he had 2 or 3 interceptions and like 4 or 5 fumbles in the 3 games. So he was making a lot of mistakes. His defense wasn't doing enough to keep them afloat in some of those situations. And when you're playing no offense, but a CJ Stroud who had probably his worst game in his NFL career in this postseason, and then Stidham, there are a lot of ifs, ands, and buts of like, what does this look like? If New England was in the NFC, would we be talking about New England Patriots in the Super Bowl? I don't think so. And that's the difference for me, is Caleb had this path where you're talking about being able to beat your rival in the Green Bay Packers and then playing toe-to-toe and taking the Rams to overtime, who Seattle and then pushed each other to the limits 3 times this season. And those are 2 of the best teams in the NFL. So I do think that to me, it shows like Caleb just has that higher ceiling to me. And that's what you kind of want to look like. Does it hit? We don't know, but that's what I feel like a lot of people are going to lean towards.
I would hope everyone learned their lesson from last year, crowning Jaden Daniels super fast, that even now 2 seasons in, I think it's foolish to definitively crown even Caleb or Drake as clearly the proven better quarterback, number 1 quarterback in that draft class. I mean, by all means, I'm still on the Caleb Williams train there in terms of who I would hitch my wagon to for the long term. But like even 2 seasons of Drake May is not enough for me to say like, all right, like, yep, he's going to be that special quarterback every single year from here on out. And, I think we got to see 3 or 4, maybe even 5 years of these guys before we can really kind of settle in and say, yep, this is now something we're seeing them consistently do. And they're kind of settling into who they are as NFL quarterbacks. Because like you said, Taylor, like defenses adjust to these guys. And even after year 2 to year 3, defenses are going to adjust to Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson's offense. Defenses are going to adjust to what Drake May did well this season. And You have to keep adjusting to the adjustments over time. And it's no guarantee that just because you did it great in the first or the second season that your third, fourth, and fifth season are going to keep at that high level.
Yeah. Plus, like, I'm really curious what Jaden Daniels now will look like with the new offensive coordinator. I mean, this draft class just feels like it's, pretty much a home run, except for Michael Penix is a huge question. But Bo Nix, who I know, Lauren, you and I had a lot of questions about, was like, he was making some big time throws before he unfortunately got hurt in the divisional round. Like, this draft class, it actually finally feels like one of those draft classes where we were promised that there's a lot of really good quarterbacks. And there's actually a lot of really good quarterbacks. Yeah. And maybe each team is okay with who they ended up taking. Do you guys have an early thought on the Super Bowl? I feel like it's Seattle in a runaway. Honestly,
yeah,
I just don't think New England can hang.
Yeah. I don't know how they're going to be able to. I think that the way that we saw Drake May get harassed this last week, I think Seattle's going to do that the entire game, and that's going to force mistakes. I don't think Drake can make the mistakes he has the last couple of games against Seattle because they're going to score points too. And so I do think it kind of feels like Seattle's world we're living in.
Yeah, I definitely go Seattle. I don't know if I'm ready to say runaway yet, just because I think the Patriots defense may test Sam Darnold in some different ways that I know the Rams have been successful at him earlier in the season, but we've seen that Rams secondary be a problem, for them the last few weeks. So they've come down a little bit. So I think the Patriots can give them a good run for their money, but I definitely think Seattle's the much more well-rounded team, and Sam Darnold's been somehow playing better quarterback than Drake May the last few weeks.
Yeah. It is funny when you talk about draft classes because that with like Lamar, Josh Allen, and then it was like Rosen and Darnold and Baker in that class. And it's like Sam Darnold's the first one going to the Super Bowl of that group of quarterbacks. It's kind of funny.
I don't know if that surprised me more. And Taylor, I know you're a Notre Dame fan like I am, or that Sam Darnold's the first ever USC quarterback.
Yeah.
To start a Super Bowl. That kind of blew my mind. I was like, damn, that could have been Caleb if he would have got there first. But congrats to the Seahawks and the Patriots. It's going to be an interesting Super Bowl. But we mentioned the rookie draft class there. Pro Football Focus grades them out as the number one graded rookie draft class. We'll discuss that next here on the Bears Squad Show.
Hey, it's Matt Derry from the Locked On Lions podcast. The people I love depend on me. If I'm gone, the financial responsibilities don't disappear. I didn't want my family figuring things out during the hardest moment of their lives. That's why I knew only one place to go. I chose life insurance through my friends at Ethos. Ethos makes getting life insurance fast and easy, 100% online. You can get a quote in seconds, apply in minutes, and get same-day coverage. There's no medical exam. You just answer a few simple health questions. You can get up to $3 million in coverage. Some policies are as low as $30 a month. I love the folks at Ethos. Protect your family with life insurance from Ethos now by going to ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. In as little as 10 minutes, you can get the free quote and up to $3 million in coverage at ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. That is ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Application times and rates may vary.
Today's episode of the Bears Squad Show is also brought to you by Gametime. There's something like being in an NBA arena, the crowd, the energy, the moment. Getting tickets, though, that part always hasn't been so simple. That's why Gametime has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast, without the hassle. It puts the advantage back where it belongs with the fans. I love being able to see the views from the seats there on the app, especially whenever I have friends that are going to Wrigley for the first time. I always tell them, make sure you use it because, choose the wrong section, you might get stuck behind a cement pole. It's also a great last-minute option as well, with NBA tickets showing up at solid prices. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today, and remember, it's gametime.com. All right, guys, so Pro Football Focus grades the Bears rookie class as the best class, which I don't think is too much of a surprise with the way, we saw Loveland play at the end. Manungai had a good year. Ozzy's your left tackle for most of the season. Luther Burden comes on strong at the end. Anything that, I feel like it's a good like Ryan Poles moment, because I think there's a lot of people who are going into this last season of, was it the right decision to keep Ryan Poles with Ben Johnson? Would it have been a better decision just to clean house, let Ben Johnson be part of the process to bring in someone in? So, Taylor, when you hear that, you think about this draft class. I think you're much higher on Poles than most people, and I'm getting around there a little bit, especially with the draft. Because what does it say to you about Poles and the job he's done with this rookie class, and it's graded out so well?
Yeah, I feel like, number one, when you go through and there's a couple you haven't even really, we didn't even get to see Zay Frazier, so there could be even an added element to that next year if he comes in and plays well too. But I do think that my argument for so long was when you have a defensive-minded coach, that's what's in your ear when you're drafting, and that's what Ryan Poles was kind of dealing with Eberflus was, okay, hey, we can have this, this top-scoring defense, and we can get which a lot of them have hit when you talk about a Kyler Gordon and a Jaquan Brisker, and then you can even add Javon Dexter. You want to see a little bit more, but it does feel like they've gotten a lot of good defensive players, but that's the coach that was in his ear saying, here's my game plan. Here's what I can do with these type of players. Now that's shifted so much because you get an offensive minded head coach, and all of a sudden that mindset goes to, let's fix the offensive line and let's get some weapons to surround your quarterback. And that's exactly what they did. Is when you go back, and I know free agency, they weren't all free agents, some were trades, but you fix your entire interior offensive line, and then you go into the draft and are like, all right, well, let's get as many possible weapons as you can. And even the criticisms I remember, because this running back class, there were so many good running backs, and we were waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for us to get a running back. And then it gets to round 7 and everybody was like, Kyle Monangai, like that's kind of strange. But a lot of people I talked to in the draft world were like, this was one of my honestly favorite players in the draft, and he was going to always go a little bit late, but he never fumbled in college. He can run over people. He's all of the things you want to hear of a running back where Monangai, and it paid off. Luther Burden went a little later than people thought he was. He was mocked a little higher for a while. Colston Loveland was the question, but I think the whole conversation when that was, okay, well, Colston fits the Ben Johnson mindset and scheme, and can pair with Cole Kmet better than what a Tyler Warren would be. I think we're going to be talking about both of those tight ends being good players, but there's no arguing that it did feel like Colston fit this offense and what Ben Johnson liked to do really well. So I think that's just the biggest point to me, is the conversations that Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles had were, you have your franchise quarterback, I think, because Ben Johnson clearly came here because he liked Caleb Williams and felt like he could do something and, develop and help that. But the next step of that is, okay, look what I did in Detroit. When you get a Sam Laporta and when you get a Jahmyr Gibbs and you draft these guys that can help surround your quarterback with the best possible weapons. And we saw all those pan out. It took a little bit of time. I mean, I feel like Ben Johnson kind of punished them a little bit for the offseason and when Luther's holdout and injuries and stuff like that. So we didn't see them as early in the season as we probably wanted to. But once they unleashed, it felt like both of their trajectories just continued up. And I'm seeing a lot of people say they expect Luther to be wide receiver 1 in Chicago next year. And that would be massive for Ryan Poles and Ben Johnson if that's the circumstance, because then you will, if you're talking about Luther and Rome, wide receivers 1 and 2, Ryan Poles is like, well, I got both of those guys.
Yeah, I think for Ryan Poles, the key to his continued general managership has been his ability to hit on at least like the early draft picks, right? The most important ones. The first and second round picks, he has pretty much nailed. I mean, to at least the kind of success you would look for there. And really, you want like any of your first 3 rounds. And there's been a few more of those misses in the third round that we can certainly all think of pretty quickly off the top of our heads. But like the premium draft pick capital has worked out well for him. And that's a really crucial foundational building block to a sustainable, successful franchise there. And then for me, like anything you can get on day 3, or especially like 5th round and beyond, that's kind of all a bonus there. Like I don't expect guys like Zay Frazier and Luke Newman to pan out to be big time players, but the fact that you get Kyle Monangai like that to be this good is definitely a real extra there. And I think the jury's still out on Shamar Turner given the injury there. But I think Ryan Poles kind of bails himself out a little bit there with the with all the questions about Ruben Hippolyte. Like it almost doesn't matter at this point. Yeah. Like he's been so good with Loveland and Burden and Ozzie Trapillo at this point that like if he swung he shot his shot on Hippolyte and that doesn't work out, like it's a bad look, but it doesn't matter that much in the grand scheme of things. Look, given how Loveland and Burden are 2 of the most promising young weapons in the NFL, really.
Yeah.
Who are you most, Lauren, I'll start with you here. Who are you most confident takes like a big leap in year 2 from this rookie class?
It's hard to define because like I think Luther Burden, but like I think the leap already started, but we won't see it in terms, like we'll see the numbers take the leap next year. Like I don't know that he's going to be like all of a sudden twice as good as in terms of the talent of the player, but it's just like because he wasn't as involved in the offense until later on. I think he'll pick up, about the second half of this season and then apply double that to next season, a full season's worth of that, and get you a 1,000-yard type of receiver next season. And that's going to feel like, wow, Luther Burden has made this big jump in year 2. And really, I think we already started seeing it. So I think it'll be like from the outside, it'll look like a big jump, but I think internally it won't be that big of a surprise for us.
Taylor?
It sucks because I feel like I would have chosen Ozzie Trapillo if he was, but it doesn't look like we'll see him, if not until later. So I think I'm going to go Kyle Monangai because I think that we started seeing more and more of Monangai, especially in critical situations. And Lauren, you mentioned this last week or the week before when it came to he was the second most when it comes from yards from scrimmage on the team. I think that continues. I think we see Kyle Monangai in so many different ways this next year in the run game and the pass game. And we've seen him be able to do the blocking side when we need it. So, and that's one of the ones when you talk, Lauren, about it doesn't really matter what happens with Hippolyte because you got this high draft capital that's working in the top, and then you hit on a 7th round running back. And oh, by the way, you've also hit on a couple undrafted free agents in your time here. So maybe there's that middle range for whatever reason where like 4th, 5th round, he can't find anybody, but he can in the beginning and the end. And that's what it's kind of felt like we've had here. But I feel like Monangai, to me, I just feel like he's going to kind of take over as that main running back RB1, because I do think you also have some decisions coming up on Swift. So you need to find out if that's your back that you want for the future as running back 1, or if you would need to bring somebody else in here. I've seen ETN stuff kind of rumored around, but I could make an argument for Colston, Luther, and Monangai, honestly.
Yeah, I'll make the argument for Colston. It's what does the leap look like? I mean, obviously he's not going to do his playoff performance every single week, but I think there's a real argument that by the end of next season, we could be looking at, as you said, Taylor, like both Loveland and Warren as like 2 of the top 4 tight ends in the NFL. And, we got some hints that Travis Kelce is going to come back next year, but he's obviously not the player he once was. But it does feel like the ceiling for all 3 of these guys is very high. But Loveland, we've seen the big moments. Like as long as whatever happened at the end of the season with the drops does not become what he is, like hopefully, and look, he's not going to be no drops until the last week of the season either, but like just being, more consistent, like towards the back end of the season, I think he can do that. Like, I think he can honestly, with how many wide receivers are on this team, like it would not shock me if once again, next year, we're talking about Colston Loveland leading the Chicago Bears in receiving yards just because Caleb really loves him on 3rd and 4th down. And like, that is so important. So I think all 3 options are honestly a good one.
I really do think it's hard to overstate how valuable it will be for both Loveland and Burden to not only be here January through April when they weren't last year because they were getting ready for the NFL draft. So now they have the playbook and everything like for the full offseason and not coming in halfway through, but then also be healthy throughout that process too. We didn't really see either one of them contribute to any of OTAs or mini camp or training camp. And I feel like I say it every time we talk about them on this podcast, but like it's so valuable to have those. I mean, from now until training camp is 7 months of time in the system working through and getting better at it. Like that's more of the time when players get better. Like in season, you're so focused on game plan each week of like how you're supposed to fit in. Like you're not really honing in on the minutia of technique necessarily. Like you're working on the side as much as you can, but like coaches aren't sitting there really fine tuning every little footwork step here or looking the ball in your hands and all this stuff. Like you're so focused on here's where you need to be on this play to beat this team. But like this offseason is like, this is the real grinding, improve yourself as an individual player time that the entire rookie class finally has, or I guess the healthy members of the rookie class finally has that they didn't have last year.
Is there anyone from this class that you're just like, I think I'm out already? I don't want to pick on Ruben Hippolyte too much, but it kind of feels like he's the answer of people that you'd be least confident that they're going to be a contributor to the Bears next season.
Have we ever seen a 5th round pick like Zay Frazier miss their entire first season and turn out to be really good? Like it's not that it was his fault by any means, but just the fact that you start a full year behind in terms of experience and being just the NFL speed of the game. Like he's going to be a rookie again next season. And it's not fair and it's not his fault, but like, I just, it's hard to envision that like he steps in and competes for a starting job right away. Like, I mean, it feels like he could be, it wouldn't stun me if he doesn't make the 53-man roster after training camp just because they're going to add at cornerback, I'm sure, and he's going to be really behind the group.
Yeah, I feel like I lean that way more so because I think that Hippolyte, I don't know if I saw enough. There was obviously some struggles, but the one positive about Hippolyte is that in college, he played every single position along the defensive line. So I think that's huge. And I think that Dennis Allen loves guys who he can do that and move them around and play him different places. We started seeing that kind of when people started getting healthy. So I could see him finding a role for Hippolyte. I don't know if we can see, to your point, Lauren, somebody missing their entire rookie season and you needing that position. It's not like we were last year, you kind of felt comfortable in the corner room, but this year, because of injuries and other things that have happened, you have to make sure that that room is upgraded a little bit. And I don't know if that's the best option for it. I personally am excited for Shamar Turner. That's one of the guys that I'm excited to see play a full season and be able, because I do think we started seeing flashes from him and it just kind of got snatched away from us really quickly with an injury. So I think there's still hope in a sense of being able to see a little bit of like rotational stuff out of Hippolyte and get Turner in here and see what he can do. And so, but I feel like at this point, to me, it leans Zay. And I feel bad saying that because it's like, poor guy hasn't even got a chance yet to show us anything, but I don't know.
All right. From Declan Doyle to Al Harris, and now some news coming in as we're live here that Ian Cunningham will be potentially one of the two finalists, it actually looks like, for the Atlanta Falcons job. We'll take a look at the latest on the Bears coaching staff updates and Cunningham. We'll do that next year on the Bears Squad Show.
This episode of the Bears Squad Show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff. The final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're back in the favorite, riding with the underdog, or building one last same-game parlay, this is the game everyone's been waiting for, where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the season and make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. If you're a new customer on FanDuel, bet just $5 and you're going to get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season's over. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started.
All right, guys, so as we're live here, we found out from Jeremy Fowler that Ian Cunningham is going to be interviewing again this week with the Atlanta Falcons. Add to that, James Lipford is the other candidate, it appears, the assistant general manager from the Houston Texans, because Jonathan Jones says those are the two in-person interviews, and a decision could come by Thursday or Friday. So it finally feels like after, I don't know, guys, years, it feels like at this point of Ian Cunningham being a hot candidate for a GM job that, Lauren, it feels like this actually might be the moment where he leaves and goes and works with Matt Ryan, who, again, I think it's got to remind people, Ryan Poles blocked 4 in college.
I still find myself skeptical that Cunningham is going to take the gig, even if it is offered to him, because it just doesn't seem like it's really what I would think he wants in his career, right? Yes, he would be the title of general manager, and I'm sure that comes with a pay raise as well. But if you're still reporting to Matt Ryan as president of football, that like Matt Ryan is the final decision maker on football decisions for your roster, and I'm sure you collaborate and stuff, but like, does Ian Cunningham want to go from being Ryan Poles' right-hand man and reporting to him to being Matt Ryan's right-hand man and reporting to him? Like, isn't the whole point of working your way up in a front office to be like, I think any of us playing franchise mode on Madden, right? We want to make the decisions for a football team. We want to be able to shape what coach we hire. Well, that's already been decided for you by the guy you're going to work for, or who your quarterback is going to be, and make, all those decisions. Like, you're the general manager, your hands and fingerprints have to be all over this team. That's what you want, right? It sounds greedy, but like, it's about the power. And why would he go to Atlanta where he doesn't really have any more power than he has in Chicago? He just has a fancier title. Like, I would think if he took the Atlanta job, he would be looking for other teams' general manager jobs in a year or two that would have more power. Like, he would just be leaving again to be a GM somewhere else instead, where he could actually run a team, as opposed to sort of, it's a lateral move to be second in command in either spot, just with a fancier title.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of the Jacksonville situation last year, because everything I was hearing out of the meetings with Ian Cunningham was he just didn't seem very interested. And it was similar. They had just hired Tony Baselli to be EVP, and he was already kind of being said to have a lot of, words for things. He had an idea. He already wanted Liam Cohen. It was pretty much Tony Baselli that was like, I went to Shad Khan. I was like, I want this guy. So it reminds me of that situation. And so I do feel like it is similar in the sense of Ian Cunningham. If he didn't feel interested in that situation, then I could see some turnoff, because also, this is your job. And if we've seen GMs get saved in certain situations where, the coach kind of gets fired. It happened with the Bills. The coach is getting fired and blamed for things, and the general manager gets to stay. But we've also seen GMs get fired for things where you feel like it was kind of beyond their control. And that's one of the situations where that could happen. If you have someone, and Matt Ryan's making all of these decisions, they're probably going to fire the general manager before they do Matt Ryan, who's been a part of that organization for so long. And so how much say do you want? And that's conversations I'm sure they're having in there of, Ian Cunningham saying, I want to have the final say in this, this, and this. And if it's a no, I could see him being like, well, then no, thank you, because I'm doing the exact same thing in Chicago right now.
Yeah, and it feels like I'm with you guys, because this doesn't feel like the end of the road for him. That if he turns this down, that he's not going to get an opportunity potentially next season. And frankly, like what you're saying, Lauren, like with like that power, the ability to like control your own team, I think I kind of want to take a risk on myself if I'm Ian Cunningham and looking at next year's draft class and being like, oh, like there's this Arch Manning kid and CJ Carr and Dante Moore, and like there's Mensa now at Miami. Like there's all these quarterbacks who could be really good next year, and you never know, it could be a total bust of a draft class like it is this year. But like the opportunity next year to control a team, potentially be able to choose your franchise quarterback if you get the right job, I just feel like it's way more attractive than being the second in command to Matt Ryan, who I think there's also just questions of like, what does he know? Like, what does Matt Ryan know? Like, he was not like, I know he played quarterback in the NFL, but that's very different than, being a GM. Like, if you've watched the John Elway documentary, he talks about like how hard it was for him to really adjust into that role as, the guy running the Denver Broncos and getting that team on track. So it's interesting to watch. Like, good for him being one of the final two. And before people ask, like, no, we don't know if the Bears will get draft pick compensation. It's not clear if Ian Cunningham gets this job, if they would actually get compensated for him getting it, because he wouldn't have the final say so there. But the other news, like this week, was interesting. Like, I think everything around guys, the Eagles, is kind of fascinating with their OC search. Like, no one wants the job, like from Charlie Weiss Jr. at LSU to Declan Doyle with the Chicago Bears. And then he's requested for the Baltimore Ravens as well to potentially work for Jesse Minter. But Lauren, do you feel like Declan Doyle's back at this point, or you think it's still kind of up in the air?
Yeah, much like Ian Cunningham, I wasn't super convinced he would take the Eagles job if it had progressed, just because, again, like the guy that can be picky and kind of wait for the right opportunity for himself. But I'm much more concerned that he'll take the Baltimore Ravens job. Like that feels to me like the right type of space, that if he does want to jump to be a play caller somewhere else, you're not going to get too many better opportunities than what he's looking at from Baltimore. I mean, just in terms of having a multi-time MVP at quarterback, but also just like organizational stability there. It's a young head coach who's going to get a long runway, and also just an organization that doesn't fire quickly, that generally makes pretty smart personnel decisions consistently and kind of stays out of trouble. Like it feels like a pretty sweet spot to come in there, call plays for a year or maybe two with Lamar Jackson before you're getting your own head coach opportunity.
Yeah, if you're looking at Philly, you're saying Jalen Hurts has had 11 offensive coordinators, and do I want to be the next one that gets fired? Probably not. And it's opposite in Baltimore. They've really had this stretch of runs where I feel like their coordinators every year are up for coaching position somewhere. You're seeing that. And like, even the Harbaugh situation, I mean, he was there for 18 years. So it's not like everything fell apart after a couple years. There is that they give you opportunities to prove that you can win, but you also have a good setup there. And that's it. When you go to a place and you feel like you have a quarterback, some people may want to work with Jalen Hurts, but there's definitely been conversation surrounding like, is Hurts the problem? We even saw that relationship between him and Sirianni kind of start to splinter at certain points too. But I've heard some stuff about Lamar too within recent weeks about like not wanting like certain film study things and showing up late to practices and stuff like that. So I've heard some interesting stuff for there. But I feel like in the case of just being like, hey, here's your product and here's how the Baltimore Ravens organization has been run, I do feel like it definitely is an upper hand to Philly.
Yeah, and I guess there's still other opportunities. Like, right before we went live, Joe Brady was named the head coach of the Buffalo Bills. So they just promote internally. So same thing, Declan Doyle, probably not a candidate there. So then 3 head coaching openings at the moment: the Cardinals, the Browns, the Raiders. I don't know, if I was Declan Doyle's friend, I would say, hey, don't take those jobs unless you really like Fernando Mendoza, like hard pass on those 3. So I guess it's not impossible that he could get requested elsewhere once those moves start to shake out. And then we have Al Harris, who I think we all kind of thought was gone. Like when the season ended, like it felt like he was a hot candidate, but not in Dallas, not in Washington, doesn't get the Packers job.
Thank God.
Yeah, so it kind of feels like Al Harris, again, there's opportunities to be had elsewhere still technically, but it feels like Al Harris also might be here to stay for the Bears.
It feels like the last real opportunity for him that makes a lot of sense would be Pittsburgh with Mike McCarthy, because he was on the staff with Mike McCarthy in Dallas and then, of course, played for Mike McCarthy on the Green Bay Packers. So that to me feels like the last obstacle for the Bears to overcome to keep Al Harris. It sounds like there's been a lot of talk that the Steelers are going after Patrick Graham, the former Giants and Raiders defensive coordinator. So Bears may end up dodging a bullet there, but it does feel like it's a matter of time. Like if he's not gone this year, he'll be gone next year for sure. And Declan Doyle might be in the same category.
Yeah, there's one other that I could see a little bit of a relationship, and that is because Campanile, the Jags defensive coordinator, has interviewed now multiple times with the Cardinals, and Campanile comes from Green Bay, and so there's a little bit of connection there when it comes to Al Harris too, and so I could see maybe something like that, but I do feel like it seems like we're heading towards the path of both these guys staying this year, but Al Harris gone next year and Declan possibly right behind him.
Lauren, you mentioned it there. I forgot. Like it's still so crazy. Like Mike McCarthy's the head coach of the Steelers. What was your reaction when you heard that news?
Yeah, I was pretty stunned. I mean, I guess I wasn't totally stunned that McCarthy got a job just because there's so many openings and not a lot of great candidates that, but I thought it would be one of these last 3 teams that's desperate, right? The Browns, the Cardinals, or the Raiders that are kind of looking around, seeing their options dry up a little bit here, that they would be like, oh, let's pull the trigger and get a stable guy that's, won at his previous stops. So for the Pittsburgh Steelers to make that move was really surprising to me. I think, there's worse moves you could make for sure. I mean, he has generally won football games pretty well. It just doesn't feel like it has any higher of a ceiling than what Mike Tomlin was giving them there. So it's a weird fit, but maybe it keeps Aaron Rodgers there one more year. I know they didn't necessarily get along super well at the end, but time heals all wounds.
Yeah, I kind of jokingly said it on air as soon as they announced that Mike Tomlin was stepping down. And I kind of jokingly was like, oh, Mike McCarthy going back to reunite with Aaron Rodgers. And then when it happened, I was like, oh, well, it's actually happening. But I do think, and that's been a lot of his thing, because when you go through his record, his win-loss record and all of those things, he's won a decent amount of football games. It's comparable to Harbaugh, honestly. We were looking at some of those numbers the other day. I think the one difference is so many people attach a vast majority of his wins to it was Aaron Rodgers and not Mike McCarthy. And that's where that separation comes in. I know Steelers fans are not happy, very underwhelmed with that hiring, and rightfully so.
All right, let's take our next break here. We'll get one more thing on the Bears coaching staff. One thing we haven't hit on yet this offseason so far. And we'll take a look at what's happening in the division, because there were a lot of coordinator changes. Which ones make us the most nervous as Bears fans? We'll get to that next year on the Bears Squad Show. Today's episode of the Bear Squad Show is brought to you by PrizePicks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to stay locked into every moment with PrizePicks, the daily fantasy app where it always feels good to be right. And with football season coming down to its final stretch, now it's the perfect time to close it out strong. PrizePicks makes watching the game even more exciting by letting you build simple lineups around player projections, no drafts, no waiting, just football action all the way through the playoffs. It's incredibly easy to get started. You just pick 2 or more players and choose more or less on their projections. I love being able to mix stars from different teams. So it's, even in the Super Bowl, you can obviously pick from the 2 lineups and build out your best lineup possible. And the new social feed makes it fun to follow friends, share lineups, and get inspiration from other players. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. Lauren, I want to revisit something that we discussed a lot, it felt like, at the very beginning of the Bears season. Think back to the Raiders game, the Commanders game. It was Richard Hightower, and there was a lack of faith early in the season. The special teams, I did think, got much better throughout the year on both sides of it, whether really it's punt, kick, all of it, all the return game. Do you feel okay now that the season's over that the Bears did not make a change unless they stun us at the special teams coach?
I do. I think it's easy to go backwards in special teams coaches, and I think we've seen enough other teams struggle with special teams to feel like, you know what, maybe this isn't so bad here, right? Like with Green Bay and their onside kick and everything else that they dealt with this season. The Rams fired their special teams coach and never quite figured it out. Like the Bears may have a fairly average special teams unit as a whole, but like that's good enough. Like as long as it's not hurting you, you're not muffing kicks, you're not misplaying the ball in the air too much. I mean, sure that Torrey Taylor could be better and Cairo Santos could be better. Like it just feels to me like scheme wise, they're not necessarily like causing too many problems there. They're rough around the edges, but they get the job done. And I will just take stability at that spot as opposed to it being this sort of like hidden headache that ends up really rearing its ugly head at some of the biggest moments for other teams in the NFC.
Yeah, I think one of the things that stood out was when there were the obvious issues early on when it came to field position, the absolute flip in that number throughout the season, I think was huge. And I think the missed tackles we were seeing early on really started to get settled out. And Hightower came out and said, it's not the players, it's, the scheme and certain things. We're going to figure it out. And they figured out a lot of the issues that happened early on. So I give him a lot of credit for being able to turn that around when it comes to Devin Duvernay, who in Baltimore was really good, had a really bad season with the Jaguars and then not a good season in Chicago. And then this year, the second half of the season, Duvernay in certain moments was the reason the Bears were staying in games late in games with some of his returns and the things he was doing. Blackwell and what he was able to do this season and so many different big moments. I think all of those things you kind of look at and you see, yes, there was issues early on, but they did a lot of things were adjusted and a lot of players got better throughout the season. And you give the coach credit for a lot of those things because it did feel like they were in the wrong spots and they were just, some of the form and tackling wasn't looking good. And those are all things that can be coached. And those are things you kind of notice down the stretch that got a lot better.
Yeah, I think for as we're saying here, the first half of the season, I was like, they got to make a change, have to. But as you said, Taylor, it just got so much better throughout the year that, it's and Lauren's good point of you can go backwards so easily when you make a change. And I think it shows a lot too of a little bit of intel about Ben Johnson. He's not going to overreact to things that happen early in the season. Like obviously the Raiders have been a mess this year, but that's a team that fired their special teams coach, their offensive coordinator, and then eventually their head coach in one season. Like the Bears just like, hey, you know what? We're going to work through this. We're going to figure it out. And it seems like they did. So I'm totally good with Hightower being back next year for this team. Let's take a look at Lauren.
I was just going to say that I think it's also worth keeping in mind that we've seen special teams as a unit, especially mainly kickoffs, I guess, change a lot in the last few seasons. And it's been this era of like everyone's kind of trying to figure this out on the fly. And so I've been willing to be a little bit more patient from at least on kickoffs, from like returns and coverage, knowing that like they're trying this new knuckleball kick thing this year. That was kind of and I think we had seen it dabbled in before, but now that's all the rage. Like it's kind of this arms race of everybody figuring out. I think it's kind of similar to like college football a year or two ago, like when NIL first started and some people really started falling behind. It was like, maybe we need just a little bit of patience while everyone figures out these new rules. And then once the playing field levels a little bit more, then you can kind of see who's actually doing what well. So I think the fact that he's been able to kind of navigate that and you haven't seen particularly bad gaffes. I mean, there was a kickoff short by Cairo Santos here or there, but like generally speaking, they've been pushing the envelope a little bit in a positive way as far as staying on the cutting edge of, well, maybe we should cover it this way, or maybe we should try kicking it that way. And they've had some success doing so. All
right, let's take a look at some of the other hires that happened in the North or I guess retainings as well that happened. Brian Flores stays in Minnesota unless they surprise us and he gets a job elsewhere. I think he's still a candidate for at least the Raiders job, maybe even the Cardinals job right now. So like Brian Flores, though, back in Minnesota. Drew Petzing is going to be the Lions' new OC, and then Jonathan Gannon is going to be the Packers' new defensive coordinator. Lauren, besides, I mean, like, I guess reaction to Flores first, and then which of the other two are just like put up any alarm bells about what the Bears are going to be dealing with going forward?
Yeah, obviously Flores is the big one, right? That we were all hoping would go coach in some other division somewhere else, and by all accounts, it seems like that's not the case. And I think the Vikings are in a good spot there because, like, Flores has a reputation that he keeps seemingly upholding of not, not giving off the type of things they want for head coaches. Even like, I think was it Mike Pettin, who was a senior defensive assistant on their staff this year, and just a week ago said, yeah, me and Brian Flores didn't really see eye to eye, so I'm going somewhere else this year. Like, even as a coordinator, there's some aspects of maybe like team leadership stuff or just managing people that isn't his strong suit, and maybe that keeps him in Minnesota for the long foreseeable future. And that's not good for any other teams in the division, but certainly good from a Vikings perspective. The other two, I mean, they're both coming from the Cardinals. They don't certainly scare you a ton there. I think Gannon in Green Bay is probably the better hire of the two if I had to rank them. I think Gannon's someone who did have some success in Philly, even though they had good personnel. Like, the Packers fans have been fighting about that on my Twitter for the last like 2 weeks about how much was Gannon, how much was that. But like, Gannon's been very good at like molding his scheme at each stop. So like, some of the things he was doing on defense with the Cardinals was different than he was doing at the Eagles and in previous stops. So it's hard to sit there and say, oh, this is exactly what he's going to do with the Green Bay Packers. But I think I have a lot less faith in Drew Petzing as an offensive coordinator than I do Jonathan Gannon as a defensive coordinator.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was gone. I was happy Halfley was gone. And so I got to celebrate for like a minute. And then I think Gannon is the one I probably am a little more concerned of. And you go back, it was the 70 sack season in Philly. He was he was the DC at that time. And yeah, you can go through and name all the personnel that they had on that team and why they got to 70 sacks. But there's also a guy named Michael Parsons now in Green Bay, and it's not like they don't have other guys that can get to the quarterback. We've seen it. And then now you have a coach that has been able to cater to a lot of players and develop these guys into pass rushers and wherever they are on the defensive line, and using also the pass rush in different ways. You saw that in Philly a lot too, the different guys he would send at different moments. And then Cardinals, when he didn't have those elite pass rushers and being able to, you're talking more about with like a Calais Campbell at times, who's, one of the better defensive tackles, but towards the end of his, probably getting towards the end of his career, he was still able to bring really good play, like moments out of a Calais Campbell. And so I think he's really good at bringing the best out of a lot of players. And he's really good at making and finding ways to kind of manufacture sacks and pressures and all of those things. And that's what you don't really want to see. But with all that being said, you have a quarterback in Chicago that can escape the pressures and can do other things. So it'll be interesting to see what it looks like with him going against that on a consistent basis.
Yeah, I think Flores is, like, as you guys said, like, it's the one that's like, that sucks. And it's like, I was hoping he would leave just to try to make life a little easier. And like I don't know what Minnesota will be like. We'll see, JJ McCarthy, like what that development looks like, but their defense is going to be good. I'm with you guys on Gann. Like, I think he can be a good fit there. I am surprised to see as much pushback from Packers fans. Maybe like they just were Al Harris or bust. Like that's how they felt. It seems like
they all wanted Jim Leonard, former Badger.
Oh yeah.
And defensive passing game coordinator, and everyone's mad because they didn't wait to interview Leonard because he was still on. The Broncos were still playing on the weekend. They hired Gannon before they even had the chance for Jim Leonard to turn them down, and so there's a lot of stirred over Wisconsin anger of like Jim Leonard passed up multiple times now for Packers defensive coordinator jobs.
Gotcha. That makes sense. I mean, I get it. Like everyone has their guys, and he's a good coach. So like I can get why they would be upset with that one. But the Petzing one is the one that I'm just like kind of surprised what the Lions are doing. Like and then they hired Mike Kafka yesterday as I think their passing game coordinator or some fancy title that he's getting. So I saw something like Dan Campbell's just trying to bring as much bald dudes into the program as possible. But that one was the one where I was like, like it really felt like Mike McDaniel was going to get a shot at that, and obviously ends up with the Chargers. So I think of the three hires, it's the one where I'm like, okay, like I think that's the best case scenario for the Bears, because I think when we talk about next season, as we slowly get into it and regression, like one of the teams that's going to always come up is, well, the Lions are going to bounce back. And with this hire, I'm just like, like we'll see what happens. But and the last one with Gannon, I'm just, I'd rather Gannon than Al Harris, I would say. Oh yeah, like it's like that's a better fit for them.
The thing I'll say about Petzing is like, yes, Cardinals fans pretty well despised him, right? So like there's there's definitely a lot of negative connotation of like, why would you hire that bum that we didn't even like in Arizona? But the one thing I'll give him is that Jared Goff is about as opposite of a quarterback as Kyler Murray was in Arizona. So you could see where maybe Petzing takes just a completely different approach with Goff, and whether that works better or not is anyone's guess. But at least, it's not like he's going to take that Cardinals offense that clearly wasn't working and then try and apply that to Detroit. Like whatever we see from Petzing in Detroit is going to be different than what he was doing in Arizona, and what he was doing in Arizona wasn't working. So he's not going to repeat the same exact mistakes. Whether he'll magically figure it out with Goff or just make different mistakes is what Lions fans are worried about. But at least you feel like, all right, you're going to get something different than what you had seen before. So hopefully that means better.
Yeah, and I think that Dan Campbell kind of learned this last year, because the whole conversation was like, okay, well, we're just going to promote these guys that have already been here because, he's been under Ben Johnson and Ben Johnson molded him as an offensive coordinator. That didn't work. So I feel like Dan Campbell maybe was like, all right, well, let me step outside of the box and bring somebody in here that has kind of a different view and perspective of the quarterback room and what offenses can look like, because it's definitely much different than the decision that they made last year after Ben Johnson.
I do like that when he decided let's go something out of the box and step away from the Ben Johnson thing. He went to the guy who stood in Ben Johnson's wedding and said, all right, he stood next to Ben Johnson, just not on the coaching field. So maybe that'll be the style of standing next to him.
I didn't know that, Lauren. That's a good fun fact there.
Ben Johnson randomly threw that in an answer at one of his press conferences last year talking about Arizona. He's like, yeah, Drew Petzing is one of my best friends and stood in my wedding. I don't think they ever I think they coached together at Boston College in 2010 or 2011, but otherwise haven't shared an NFL sideline before. But yet there's always a Ben Johnson connection back to Detroit.
Now we're about to see them at a basketball game together again. Here we go.
Yeah, but I can live with that one. I can live with that one. It's not Eberflus with LaFleur. That one's okay. All right, that will do it for this episode of the Bears Squad Show. We'll be back with you on Friday at 10 a.m. Myself, Lauren, and Adam Sager. Let's take a look at Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft 1.0. We'll start to take a look at what the Bears draft needs are this year. So thank you for listening and watching. We will talk to you on Friday. Peace.